Aloha, and welcome to another episode of the Groundswell Origins Podcast, where I connect you to outstanding humans and sustainable ideas. I'm your host, Scott Martin. Today, we have an incredible, outstanding human, the one and only Susan Casey. She's the author of Waves, Voices in the Ocean, Devil's Teeth, and their new book, which is called The Underworld, which she gives us a real deep insight on her journey of getting underneath the ocean to these incredible depths in the abyss, and talking about all the different magical things that she has experienced and seen there. And she's just such a wealth of knowledge describing every aspect of the ocean. Her love for the ocean is clear, and I share it with her. And I was really honored to have her be able to write an excerpt for my book. And having her on the podcast and describing all these things, some of the lessons that you're going to see. I mean, I literally could have gone for 2 hours talking about the ocean and some of the nature's lessons that she can share with us. So without further ado, let's paddle in. Here we have in the studio the one and only Susan Casey. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to have you. You and I have been talking about doing this interview for, it feels like almost a year and a half.
Oh, yeah, it does.
I think when we started chatting, you were working on your current book, and I just want to dive right into it. How's it going with the new book? The timing of your book and the recent events with the Titan and stuff, it really seemed to create a huge limelight for you. And how's that been?
Well, the book came out August 1st, and I think the Titan stuff happened in July. So when, I remember I was walking down the street in Manhattan, and I got a text, and somebody had texted me the news that this submersible had gone quote unquote missing. And I just stopped, because I had been embedded in the world of deep sea submersibles for 5 years at this point, and was very aware of the sub and how much of an outlier it was and how dangerous it was. And missing, of course, to anybody who was in that world, it wasn't like we thought it was lost and it might be found. It was, always people were worried that this would implode because it wasn't built to withstand the pressures of the deep ocean. So, yeah, it was tragedy. It was tragedy that didn't have to happen. And yet, out of respect for the families, out of, respect for the process of finding the wreckage and all that, nobody really wanted to speak out about it. But when they did find the wreckage, I decided to write about it for Vanity Fair and just sort of bring people backstage. Over the years, when this sub was being discussed, being argued about, people in the submersible industry, it's a really small, tight-knit industry. We're trying to help. We're trying to talk them out of it. So, so I sort of went through my own little writing therapy of working that out. But in The Underworld, my book about the deep ocean, it basically features most of the people who are doing deep sea exploration and not OceanGate purposefully. The word OceanGate does not appear there. And Titan didn't write about it because really what they were doing was not deep sea exploration. They were, I don't know what they were doing. It never seemed like it was going to end well. And of course it didn't.
Yeah. Interesting. Do you think that the timing of your book and those events, do you think that that's actually put like a really good light? Like, I know that tragedy, but it's put some attention on when I was reading your book and you're talking about, like, we've only explored like this little micro amount of exploration. Do you think this maybe is opening up people's attention to it in a hopefully a positive light, or do you think it was negative?
No, I mean, I think people very quickly understood the difference between this and the science class and, the certified submersibles that I write about in my book. And there aren't that many deep sea submersibles. I mean, there might be, to go to the depth that they were going to, which was 4,000 meters or about 13,000 feet. There's about 6 or 7 vehicles in the world that can take people to those depths, and all of them are certified. It's being certified or classed is what they call it with subs, is the equivalent of peer review. It's like there's an outside independent expert marine organization looking at everything you do, from the drawing board and even before the drawing board to its sea trials, and then it has to be kind of maintained annually. So I do think that it was easy for people to understand the difference. And I also think that there really is a lot of interest in the deep ocean because it's like the ultimate, it's like the black box, but the black box is 95% of the biosphere of the earth, which is, people know that the ocean covers 70% of the planet's surface. But what I like to think of it as is as a three-dimensional habitat, living space, biosphere. 98% of it is ocean. So the 2%, our little 2%, is everything terrestrial and where we live, and then 98% of it is ocean, and 95% of that 98% is the deep ocean. So waters below 600 feet. And yeah, we hardly know it. We're learning a lot about it, but it's just so immense. I mean, I think it's really hard for people to actually wrap their heads around how immense it is. And pretty much everywhere you go, if you touch down somewhere, you're going to be the first person who's ever seen it. And we've only explored just a tiny, tiny fraction of it. We have a lot to learn about it still, even though we know quite a bit now.
And so you went deep in the subs, and was it freaky at all? Like, was it kind of weird? Like I'd be claustrophobic. I don't know.
Oh, well, if you're claustrophobic, it might be a little freaky. I mean, they do test you to make sure you're not claustrophobic. I don't think if you were claustrophobic, you would have a great time, but I'm not. And if I was, I probably would have just chucked a Valium and gotten in anyway, because it was really my dream. I mean, as somebody who's kind of obsessed by the ocean and curious about the ocean, the idea of a chance, to go down there, it's a pretty rarefied experience. And I really wanted to do it. So it wasn't like I was scared. It was more like I was just excited to the point of, almost paralysis. And everybody who goes down in a sub mentions this. Time goes really weird. It goes really elastic. And you can't tell how long you've been down there. I mean, obviously you can wear a watch, but there's no signposts, and you're so incredibly present. And even though it's dark, the subs have very strong lights, and there's always stuff to look at. And everything that you see is most likely something you've never seen before. And it could very well be something nobody has ever seen before. So it's not like you're thinking about, picking up your dry cleaning or something like that. You're just completely present in time. There's no room for fear when you're completely present. You can be scared afterwards, maybe before, but during, you're just kind of there, present, focused.
And you mentioned this is a lifelong goal, a dream. I was gonna show you this. Like, when I was growing up, my parents got me Jacques Cousteau. My wife, for my birthday, she found the original version of the series that I had when I was a kid. And I was the same way. I was like so enamored with like what was under the ocean and the seaweed and diving and all this stuff. And I know I kind of always shared this desire to kind of know more about the ocean. It kind of was such a labyrinth. And you've got this whole array of different things you've been doing around the ocean. I was going to ask you, like, where did it all begin? Like, this passion for the ocean, and maybe walk us back a little bit of your career path, like just you working with Oprah, Outside Magazine, Sports Illustrated, and then now these books.
Well, I grew up in Canada, and I grew up in a part of Canada around Toronto where there were tons of lakes, but no ocean. And for me, from the very beginning, it was just this sort of compulsion to be near water. And also, up in Muskoka, where we would go in the summer, the lakes are dark. But every so often you'd see this giant fish, like someone would catch a muskie or a pike or something. And I was always very fascinated in seeing what was beneath the surface, and especially because you couldn't see it. So the second you break the surface of the water, to me, even as a kid, it was like you're going into this other world, this parallel universe. How can you not want to see what's down there? It's like there's a lot down there. And what would you see if you went down there? And what's it like? And there's this big party happening down there, and we don't get to ever see it. No. Then, of course, I was a competitive swimmer. I started after university. I swam through university and then started doing open water swimming in the ocean, and realized that the ocean, I would swim in lakes and keep my eyes shut. I was sort of scared of fish, but then gradually began to open my eyes in the ocean, and stuff I was seeing was just so incredible. But then I think where it really got real was when I did my first book, The Devil's Teeth, and I went out to the Farallon Islands off the coast of San Francisco, and I was hanging out with these scientists who are studying great white sharks, and there's a big congregation that comes every fall to the Farallon Islands. It's one of, I think it's the largest congregation of great white sharks annually, and they knew them. They knew them by name. The same sharks would show up every year, and I got out to the Farallons, and it was that same dark, inscrutable water, but this time it's the Pacific Ocean, and stuff is popping through the surface. There's an 18-foot great white shark, and it's eating a seal on the surface. And one day there were 40 blue whales lunge feeding, just popping up through the surface. And one day a mako shark showed up, and one time a gray whale calf showed up. And there was one single commercial diver there who was still brave enough to dive around all these sharks. He was picking urchins off the seafloor, and he told me, I came across this 10-foot tall anchor. There's obviously like all these shipwrecks down there. And once again, it was just like, okay, there's this parallel universe, this other world in our world. Like, let's go down there and see what's there. In the Underworld, I sort of describe it as, it's like being in this incredible mansion with every room, hundreds of rooms, thousands of rooms. There's artworks, there's animals, there's treasures in every room. And we're like, okay, we're just going to open a couple of the doors. So that's what the ocean is to me. It's a chance to open way more doors and, to join this other world, at least to be able to witness it.
There's, for a lot of people, the ocean they're fearful because they don't know what's underneath. I know that sometimes when I'm surfing, I'm kind of a little bit like paddling with my fingertips a little bit because I've kind of got a little shadow or something. And I always find it's much more peaceful the minute I put my head down under the water. It seems more fearful when I'm above than when I just actually get into the water and stuff. And I was just curious, like, what lessons have you learned about coming in and out of the world? You've been living in under the water and then above. What is something that you've experienced, or you just thought, like you said, time, like that was something that just time is kind of elastic. What's something else that would not be present for most people that you would just say that's been part of your overall experience with the ocean?
One of the things that I think about a lot when you're dealing with really overwhelming forces of nature, and obviously I've written about giant waves and some of the really powerful aspects of the ocean, is a sense of humility. Um, we're really good at shooting rockets into space, and we're comfortable with that. We want more. We can go upwards. Maybe we'll get another planet or two. We can start a colony. What we're not as good at is sort of surrendering to the fact that there are forces in nature that we don't get to dictate how they behave. And it's like this illusion of control. So one of the things I love about the ocean is that it really sets you straight pretty quick about who's in charge. And I think that humility is something that I wish we incorporated more above the surface, and that we, sort of, I guess, internalized the truth that we're part of this whole system. We're not in charge of it. We don't run it. We can affect it. Often people will say to me, well, aren't you worried about the ocean? Like, what do you think is going to happen to the ocean? Like, hey, the ocean's going to be fine. But if we think we're going to trash the ocean and we're going to be fine, then that's the mistaken perception. So that's another thing that I really love about it. You don't stand in front of an 80-foot wave and think, I'm the man, or I'm the woman. You're there humbly. And, if you want to go down in a submersible 4 or 5 or 6 miles, there are some rules. And one of the rules is there's going to be, 8,000, 12,000, 16,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. And we don't get to negotiate that rule. That's her rules. So I love that about it. And I'm sure there's many more, but that one often comes up. I think it's an underrated superpower, humility.
Beautifully said. You wrote in Vanity Fair, I have the quote here, as beautiful as, the abyss doesn't care if you went to Princeton or that your ancestors signed the Declaration of Independence. If you want to go down in her world, she sets the rules. That is to me, like, from being someone that's a surfer, is I totally get that, because when I was living in Hawaii, I learned very quickly to never turn my back on the horizon. It can in Hawaii, unlike most places, it can just jack with weird sets out of nowhere. And I was curious, what was sort of like maybe one of the most exhilarating or slash terrifying experiences you've had with the ocean that created this humility?
I mean, certainly the first time I saw, 70-foot wave, it was at Todos Santos, at Killers off of Ensenada, and it wasn't even a particularly big day, but this very outlying wave came in, and I remember there was sirens, and um, I realized I'd seen some big waves by that point, and I was really interested in seeing the biggest waves the ocean could produce because, along with wanting to follow these big wave surfers who were somehow surviving in this environment by being part of it, not by conquering it. I mean, they're like the humblest people you'll ever meet, but because they were big enough and powerful enough to actually destroy and disappear ships. So I was looking for them. But when I actually saw a wave that big, when it gets to be above 50 or 60 feet, it does something really different. It doesn't break right away. It kind of advances as a wall for a minute. Like there's just a beat or two longer. And I'd never seen that before. And it was just, I mean, I couldn't actually believe what I was seeing. It was scary enough. I wasn't in the impact zone, but I was close enough to see it well. And I mean, you just really sort of, it's like a wake up call. It's like, oh, that's what those waves look like. So
Were
that
you in
was
a
pretty
boat?
extraordinary.
Were you on the boat on the shoulder, or were you on land?
Yeah, I was on the boat, and not really on. There wasn't really a shoulder, like just kind of back from pretty. I don't know how far back, maybe 300 yards.
Hmm.
I guess the shoulder. Felt pretty close. I have to say, same thing at Chopu. When Chopu started going off on a big day, like I was really kind of astonished by the power of it. I remember just kind of gaping at it, and somebody just said, "Yeah, yeah, it's like a gun going off," and it's just you've never seen a wave behave like this. I mean, the reef is you're the surface of the reef is I don't the wave sucks up so much water that there's like a hole at the base of it. So those kinds of things are always really interesting to witness. And that's what I try to do is bring that experience back on the page, so that people can understand what it's like to do that. Seeing large animals in the ocean. I mean, I've been in the water now with pretty much everything, and that's always really incredible. It's like a real visitation.
Hmm. You wrote your book, Voices in the Ocean, is about dolphins, and I wrote you wrote something about how they're so close to us in the way that they have their own communities and families and different things. Could you share that a little bit? Because I love that word pod, like in building community. And I in my own community, I use dolphins as the example. I'd love to know more about what's so, because they feel like they're a gang, but a good gang.
Yeah, I mean, think about their environment. Okay, they're in the ocean. There's no walls. There's nowhere to hide. There's no, they're out there, and their community, their home is themselves, that themselves and their group, and it's a nomadic kind of existence. And so, obviously they've got predators. If you were going to survive in this completely wide open environment, you would want your pod. You would want your sort of group. They hunt. They hunt collectively. The really interesting thing about dolphins, and now by dolphins, I should say that dolphins also include things like melon-headed whales, pilot whales. The word whale doesn't necessarily mean it's a different kind of animal. The dolphin is a toothed whale, basically. So there are all kinds of different types of dolphin pods, and sort of the pinnacle of those are orcas, and their groupings are unbelievably fascinating. I think I can make a pretty strong argument that orcas are the most intelligent and highly evolved, successfully evolved animals on Earth. Um,
Really?
what's really interesting is one of the people that I interviewed and spent time with for Voices in the Ocean was a cetacean neuroscientist from Emory University named Lori Marino. And um, so if you look at a dolphin brain, it looks a lot like a human brain, but it's bigger. Let's just say bottlenose for the sake of this anecdote. It's big. It's got a lot more elaboration. So it's like the sort of grooves and sulci in it are a little deeper. It's the lobes are. It looks like a human brain, but kind of bigger and more elaborate. But if you look closer at it, they have, and I'm hoping I'm going to get this right because it's been a few years since I studied dolphins, but bear with me. There's one lobe in the limbic area that is really highly developed, really elaborated. So unlike our limbic system, theirs is like a little bit more baroque. And the limbic system relates to emotions. So when cetacean neuroscientists look at this elaborated lobe, what it tells them is they're really doing something in the area of emotions. So although you can never really completely get inside the head of another creature, the anatomy and the physiology of the brain indicates that they're doing something important with emotional processing. And they also have these neurons called Van Economo neurons that are long, spindly neurons that not every animal has. And they have a lot of them. And they seem to have something to do with empathy. So we have them. Dolphins have 3 times more than we do. Elephants have them. They process something, again, emotionally. So the hints are there that the dolphins have a really rich, empathetic emotional life, but you can even take it one step further, and this is where it gets really pretty wild. So they've been around for, I don't know how many millions of years, I can't recall off the top of my head, but much, much longer than we have. We've been around for maybe 2 million years. Let's just say they've been around for 25 million, and I'm kind of going off the top of my head right here, but a long time. They can work each hemisphere of their brains independently. So they can shut one half off. They have a lot more control, fine-tuned control over the 2 hemispheres of their brain than we do. And if you think about it for a second, if we were to survive for many millions of years more, would we not maybe start becoming more empathetic? Like, wouldn't that be maybe a survival strategy that would benefit us to be able to get along more, to care about each other more? So one of the things that scientists kind of hypothesize is that there might be, with this elaborated limbic system and these extra empathy neurons, the sense of the self being slightly different. So the pod, all of a sudden, we think of ourselves as, here's me, here's the edge of my body, here's you, you're separate, you're over here. Maybe there's a more flexible definition of self with this brain. And so there's like a sort of a more of a collective consciousness and even a level beyond empathy. And these are my words. My interpretation of the science is like a level beyond empathy. So instead of I care about you, there's a certain indication anatomically with the brain that is maybe like I am you. I kind of am you. We're somehow collective.
Right.
And that starts to become interesting because there are things that they do that scientists can't explain. Like, why do they strand a whole pod of pilot whales will strand if only maybe one is injured? Like, there are behaviors that we can't really explain.
Explain strand. Like they'll abandon.
So they like beach themselves. So when this happens with certain types of dolphins a lot, and pilot whales are one of them, where they go up on the beach and they die. This happened pretty recently, and sometimes with pilot whales, there will be dozens of them, scores of them, even hundreds of them. So they'll all just beach themselves onto the sand and die. And if people start putting them back in the water, they'll just come right back up on the beach. A lot of them, and no one can figure out why they do it.
So because one of their pod is injured, and they're dying with them.
Yeah, I mean that's one hypothesis.
Interesting.
It's not settled science for sure. Yeah. Nobody knows. But one of the things I did for Voices in the Ocean was go to Taiji, where the cove, where they hunt dolphins and they also catch them and export them to marine parks.
Yeah.
And when you see the cove, I mean, it's just
I've seen the movie.
It's creepy.
Yeah.
It's creepy because of what happens there, but the actual physical environment of the place is beautiful, and it makes it even more surreal how ugly the whole town is, because it's beautiful, the ocean and the coves, but here you have this like dark thing going on. But they could jump over the nets. There's absolutely no way they could not jump over nets, but they don't. Why don't they? They're smart. We know they can do all kinds of things cognitively. Why don't they do that? They don't want to leave the others in their pod.
That is so interesting. It melts me a bit, because I'm just like, animals, And the story of these animals and having more empathy than just connecting. Like, is it true that killer whales have never killed a person in the wild?
Yeah, that's true. They've killed people in captivity, which, by the way, I would too if I was an orca
Totally.
in captivity. I'd be trying to
Yeah.
probably.
And you think about how big and how scary looking they are and their capabilities, and yet that's never happened.
They are so advanced in terms of their communication abilities with one another. They're matriarchal. So the oldest females run the show, and they're one of the only animals, pilot whales, orcas, and humans are one of the only or the some of the only animals where the older females go through menopause. And what's the point of that? That's hopefully so you can pass on your wisdom and maybe help take care of grandchildren. And so in a matriarchal cultural society like a pod of orcas, it's really important that the oldest female is like the sort of the wisdom keeper, who, again, this is a culture, and believe me, cetaceans have culture. This is not just my own opinion. This is scientists have written about this, and um, you can make the argument really clearly with sperm whales and orcas about having an actual cultural interchange of information throughout generations. Um, they don't have libraries. They don't have maps. She is the archive, the oldest females. So when you start thinking about, an oral history, okay, when the ocean did this and the fish were not here, here's where we went. So it makes it all the more sort of horrifying that we would take the matriarchs out of pods and put them into aquariums and things like that, which happened a lot in the 70s and 80s. You're taking away the archive, the survival strategy for that pod as well,
It
and
seems like
not to mention a
public.
family member.
It seems like public sentiment now is against that. I think it feels like it is. Am I right in thinking that, or is it diminishing, or is it still a problem?
I mean, it's still a problem in certain parts of the world. I mean, I certainly think anybody who's conscious and aware is, completely horrified by it. And I mean, it's monstrous, really. I hope it becomes an artifact very quickly everywhere. But I do think there are still, I mean, I don't think it's gone. And I certainly think there are more rules against grabbing orcas at this point. But over in the Faroe Islands, they do this horrendous hunt for pilot whales. It's really, and you can't really eat. Not to say this makes it explicable, but you can't even eat the meat. I mean, so many chemicals are in the ocean that are lipophilic, so they bind to fat. So, I mean, if you eat a pilot whale, you might as well just be eating a Superfund site. So
So why are they doing the hunt still?
it's blood sport, and it's horrible, and it
Right.
really is just barbaric. And I wish they would stop it, but they. Same with Japan. They sort of hide under this cloak of tradition, but it's not tradition. And in any case, when you have a tradition that you know better, you stop that tradition. So, anyway,
Yeah,
uh,
we used to stone people in the streets.
yeah. I mean, we used to
Maybe we should evolve.
slavery was once considered a tradition. I mean,
That's
it
right.
just
Right. Yeah, interesting. When I'm looking at all the stories that you have that you've experienced, what is something that when you're looking at these animals and sea life, and you look at a parallel of, like, this is something that I feel like if people understood this, it would give them just like we did with this describing sort of the killer whales. Like, we are like, that's another level of sense. It's almost like us having higher consciousness, right? What are, like, some things from, like, I don't know, like seaweed and jellyfish, or different things that you must have like 1,000 stories of little things you went, oh, this behavior, this plant or this thing is just, it's remarkable for these reasons. And
I mean, it's stuff in the deep ocean that's adapted to be under intense pressures, living entirely in darkness, is absolutely fascinating because it's hard for us to wrap our heads around because there's no sense of ourselves in these creatures. I mean, they really, they have a completely different reality. There are around hydrothermal vents on the seafloor. There are creatures that never see the sunlight, so What are they existing on? They're existing on actual chemical energy and nutrients that come from the interior of the earth. So as well as, this top-down ecosystem that we're part of, that's sort of powered by the sun as an energy source and photosynthesis, and there's another one that comes from the inside out, that comes from all the energy and nutrients from within the earth, called chemosynthesis. So that we didn't even know till 1977. And when they discovered that, it actually expanded the definition of life. Like, here's another strategy for life. So that brings up all these other really interesting questions about, okay, well, how many more strategies does life have? And I would be willing to bet that the answers to some of those questions are in the deep ocean. Something that really kind of blew my mind is that, you think of the seafloor, no matter how deep it is, but let's just say 6-7 miles down, that's not where life ends. There's pores and cracks and fissures in the ocean crust, and there's water circulating through that, seawater and minerals, and there's a whole microbial ecosystem beneath the seafloor thriving that goes down at least a mile, and they call it the deep biosphere. It's ancient, it's completely bizarre, it's really frontier of science.
You're talking about the topsoil of the bottom of the ocean?
Yeah, beneath that. As the people in it, like, not all that long ago, were like, well, nothing could live at the bottom of the ocean. So cold, all the pressure. Not only does stuff live all the way through the water column, it extends as far as a mile beneath the seafloor. Just thriving life.
Well, if you think about the things that have died over the years, it's like topsoil and fertilizer a little bit. You maybe, that's, I never even thought of that. Like, this, the soil layer is like alive. It just shows like how much we underestimate how Earth is a living thing.
Oh yeah, and so much of it we can't see with our own eyes, and we tend to navigate the world as a species. We tend to navigate the world by vision. We'll look at something and think, oh, well, here's what I think about that, and we'll make a story, and that's our reality. But if you think about all the creatures that have lived for so much longer than we have, and particularly when you think of the biosphere as 95% in darkness all of the time, vision is not a great sense as your primary sense to navigate the world. We can navigate our part of the world pretty well, but to quote John Lilly, who was kind of like the father of dolphin science and was a real, sort of psychonaut who experimented on his own brain, we're babies in the universe. And eventually, I think we're going to have to understand, navigate reality with frequency and with different senses than we have now. I think that's something we'll develop if we can manage to survive ourselves.
Well, let's talk about sound waves and frequency, because that's how they communicate. A lot of these animals, like dolphins, right? They use sound
They're
waves.
acoustic. Yep. Because think about it. Even if they live in the sunlight waters of the ocean, it's dark half the time. It's night. But most of them go down far enough that it's dark more than half the time. And there are some dolphin and whale species that go quite deep. Sperm whales, beaked whales. They're constantly surprised at how deep they can go. So it wouldn't be great to be using. They do have good vision, and I'm sure it's a sense that they draw on. But acoustic is far more effective in an ocean environment. I mean, sound travels a lot farther. It travels faster. That is their world. The reality is just different.
The sound of whales or the ping of sonar. I've always been fascinated with that sort of that. It's like textual distance. I don't know how to describe it. Like it's an echo in a Grand Canyon. It's like an echo. It's open, but it's different. It's like condensed and distant. I don't know.
Well, there's a band in the ocean where sound travels particularly well, called so far it's the deep sound channel, and whales definitely use it. I mean, there's all kinds of mysteries with sound in the ocean. How is it that all the humpbacks were singing the same song even when they couldn't possibly be hearing each other? And then when the song changes, it changes globally. I mean, I'm not an expert on this by any means, but it's pretty fascinating.
Okay, so you're saying somehow someone's recording going, hey, they're singing this song, and someone that said the world's calling going, hey, they're singing the same song. They actually figured that out.
And yeah.
And
they still don't 100% know what the purpose of a humpback song is, and why only males sing, and why only 10% of males sing. I remember being on a stand-up paddleboard in Maui, above a singer, and you could hear it in the air, and the whole board was just vibrating. They they hang in the water with their tails up and their heads down,
Hmm.
and it's a powerful vibration. And there's information encoded in that. I think we perceive more of this than we realize, but like I said, I think we're like kids driving a tricycle right now. Here's an interesting question that I've been thinking a lot about lately is when artificial intelligence becomes really embedded in our world and it becomes more difficult to tell, is something real, is it machine generated? I think frequency is how we're going to have to navigate that, because certain frequencies can only come from the organic world. Only, and this is very subtle. And again, this isn't scientific. This is me talking off the top of
Hmm.
my head, just a
I'm
thought.
following.
Machines can't love. So the frequency of nature, in my mind, is love. And if we can follow that thread, I really think that that's going to be a sense that will really serve us well in the future, to be able to tell the organic from the machine. And it's going to be a subtle thing, but I think we can do it.
That is really interesting. I like your hypothesis. Mine has been, I've really been promoted with my book Groundswell about community, and it's really the connection and human connection is going to be artificial intelligence is not going to be able to replace that. You
No,
know,
because machines can't love.
yeah, and
They can create things, but um, and maybe eventually, I have to think eventually they're going to become really good. And it's going to be hard for us to tell stuff apart by looking at it. But
well,
I think we can.
that's I think what probably where the biggest problem is going to be, because when we look at truth right now, the version of truth is, well, we got it on video. That's ending.
Yeah,
There's
right.
going to be a
Or
moment.
audio.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's
So
like,
yeah, so our senses are maybe not evolving at the same speed as our technology, but um, dolphins and whales can show us the way forward. And also the other people that really understand frequency in the ocean are the wayfinders, the Polynesian navigators, who, when they had to cross the Pacific Ocean without benefit of any instruments, they were looking at absolutely everything and really feeling their way through that, as well as observing. But I think on very subtle levels, being able to really feel what the water was doing, not just look at it.
it's and that's great because Dr. Elizabeth and I are actually chatting on Monday, and I'm looking forward to her and I. Yeah, we're going to do a series called Wayfinders. We're going to do a collab together talking about ancient wisdom into modern applications and stuff. It's super. I'm so excited about it. When you're talking about frequency and being in the water, you've been in the water a lot with maybe even surfing. Have you noticed that, for me anyways, when I've been in the water for a long time, I kind of get the rhythm of the heartbeat of the ocean. I feel something, even almost like my heart kind of goes with it. I can't explain. Like I can tell when I'm out of the water, I don't notice it, but when I've been in the water a lot over extended periods of time, I kind of feel like I'm with the rhythm of the ocean. And when I get out of the water, I notice it. There's contrast. I'm like, I'm I don't know I don't know how to explain it, but like I'm kind of out of touch with the water or something. I don't know. Have you ever experienced anything like that?
Oh yeah, I mean, because as a swimmer, you're constantly thinking about very fine sensations on your fingers and your body position and all this. But also, water is carrying a lot of information, and it's a really unusual substance. And of course, you're feeling the rhythm of the ocean and the personality of the ocean. I mean, when I went on my deepest dive for the Underworld, I was down several miles. And when you get that deep, I had made a shallower dive to about to 3,300 feet, but I was going now down past 15,000, 16,000, 17,000 feet. You really get a sense of the presence of the ocean. It's very serene. You don't really get that at the surface when you have waves and wind and the interaction with the atmosphere, but you do get a rhythm. You absolutely get a rhythm. But down below, it's more like you're inside the life force of the planet, and you can feel it is not space. And you can actually see it when they turn the lights of the sub on, that there is just like this matrix of life through the water column. And so many of the creatures are small. Um, a lot of them are bioluminescence. The sub will jostle them and they'll light up, and you can actually use them to see that it's water, because otherwise, all the indications that you have, the wind, the current, the breaking waves, none of that is present, right? And it's the deep ocean tends to be, the water's clear except for the marine snow, but the water itself is quite clear. um, you really get this sense of a presence, of a big, serene presence. And I found that really intoxicating. It's just different. So it's like everything you love about the ocean, in the deep ocean, it's like it's on steroids.
Wow. Is there movement at all?
There's movement in the marine snow as it's falling, but usually if the sub is descending slightly, at about a meter per second, so it's going a little bit faster. So the snow looks like it's going upwards. So that's how you can tell it's an actual medium. Otherwise, you would have a hard time because it's just this sort of very clear, very unperturbed environment. I mean, there are obviously places in the deep ocean where there's a lot of action. Like there are 75% of Earth's volcanism happens down there. There's undersea volcanoes that erupt every day, and there's action. But most of the time, when you're just descending in a sub, you're just it seems like it's very peaceful.
What about waves? Like you were saying when you and I were chatting when we first did a quick little download before my book, you were talking about waves that go all the way to the ocean floor.
Yeah, so there are these giant waves called internal waves underneath the surface, and they're created by differences in temperature and density. So, like, think of a layered cocktail, and then there's tidal movements, so they're pulled, and they can be really powerful. They're really huge. They can be hundreds of feet tall, hundreds of miles long. They can move at more than 3 knots. So they only discovered them fairly recently. They started in certain parts of the world when they were putting down deep rigs to drill oil. The drill ships were getting knocked around, and they're throughout the ocean. And subs have occasionally gotten caught in them, and you don't really want to be caught in one because they can bash you into things, and I would say they're probably the most powerful waves because they're the biggest waves. I mean, maybe outside of tsunamis, but tsunamis aren't even as big.
Okay, so they're bigger than tsunamis.
They can be hundreds of miles long.
And like when I think of Chopu, like how thick it is are we talking even thicker than that? Because there's no real cresting wave. There's no like, or does it change as the ocean floor? Or is it just like a wall of energy?
It's a wall of energy.
Wow.
And it's moving. And think of a really powerful river all the way down to the riverbed.
Right.
It's like moving like that. And so it's a current in a way, but it isn't. Like the currents are different. But an internal wave will act like a current in its motion.
Does it? Where does it
like
dissipate?
It's moving? Yeah.
When it hits land?
I don't know if they hit land, but I would imagine there are places where they do.
Right. But does it dissipate? Like, does it just like lose energy, or is it just?
Yeah, it would lose energy eventually.
What causes it? Just the change in temperature, you said, or is there some other?
Yeah, density and temperature, and it's like one layer is being pulled over another layer. I mean, there's a lot of the ocean isn't homogeneous down to the seafloor. They're called thermoclines, and they're like layers of temperature and density. And there are places where it can be saltier, and that also creates density. So it's not like there's just one homogeneous big chunk of water. In order to be able to tell the depth of, let's just say you're measuring a very deep place in the ocean, you need to sample throughout the water column, because you have to measure depth with sound. That's the only way you can, there's no GPS in the ocean. There's no other way. So they shoot sonar, but the sound waves travel at different speeds depending on the water temperature and density. So they have to account for that by measuring the different thermoclines and, folding that into the equation when they're figuring out depth. So it's actually sort of a complicated process to get an exact depth measurement in the deep ocean. And, we've only mapped 25% of the seafloor at high resolution. So we have 100% of it at very low resolution, but only 25% at, really high resolution where we can see finer features.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an ongoing process, and it's pretty technical.
Is the deepest the Marias Trench? Is that the deepest part of the ocean?
So there's 4 layers of the deep ocean. There's the uppermost layer, which is called the twilight zone or the mesopelagic zone, and that's from 600 feet to about 3,300 feet, or 200 to 1,000 meters. And below that and that's a really interesting layer of ocean, because it's just, there's more animals, more creatures in that band of deep ocean than all the rest of the ocean combined. And
Really?
80% of them are bioluminescent. So it's really something to see. And below that is the midnight zone, or the bathopelagic zone, from 1,000 meters to 3,000 meters approximately, or about 3,300 to about 10,000 feet. And below that is the abyssal zone, from 3,000 meters down to about 6,000 meters. Biggest ecosystem on Earth, just huge. Covers 54% of the planet. But there's a the deepest part is called the Hadal zone, named after Hades, the god of the underworld. And it occurs, that Mariana Trench that you just mentioned is an example of this. So we have tectonic plates, kind of like a patchwork around the planet, right? And they move slowly at around the speed that fingernails grow. And so on one side of the plate, they're pulling apart. And when that happens, magma comes up from the mantle and creates new seafloor. So even though the Earth is like 4.5 billion years old, the oldest seafloor is 340 million years old, because it is constantly being recreated. And on the other side of the plate, and this is where the Hadal zone comes into it, the two plates are colliding. So on one side it's pulling away, on the other side it's colliding. And when two plates collide, one plate is driven downward, and it eventually will be driven back into the mantle. It will melt. And if you do that with your hands, you can see that it creates like a V-shaped trench. So the Hadal zone goes from 6,000 meters to almost 11,000 meters, or 20,000, almost 36,000 feet. And there are these long trenches. So if you think of the Himalayas, turn them upside down, and that's like a Hadal trench. The Mariana Trench is, like, for example, 44 miles wide and 1,500 meters long. And the deepest spot that we know of is in there. It's called the Challenger Deep, and it's our best measurement at this point is 35,687 feet. But there are other trenches, like the Tonga Trench, the Philippine Trench, and the Kermadec Trench, that are almost that deep. I think Tonga's very, very close.
The Philippine, is that near the south part of the island? Where is that located?
I'd have to look at a map of the Pacific to tell you exactly.
I grew up in the Philippines, so that's what I was
curious. But it's another big, deep one. The ones that are really deep, there's only 4 that go below 10,000 meters, and it's one of them.
Wow.
So that's a pretty extreme environment. We're just starting to get to know it. The technology to go down there is pretty new, but fascinating. So it's only 2% of the seafloor, but it's 45% of the ocean's depth. And the reason that that's important in terms of just what you had asked me about
the trench.
Oh God, I forget what you asked me. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
I was going to circle back around.
Oh, I think I was just asking. Originally was
I know what it is. So this is what I was going to say about subduction. So you would think that if the Earth is constant, if there's new seafloor being created all the time, well, wouldn't the Earth just be expanding? Well, the subduction is what happens on the other side. So it's in perfect equilibrium. So as new seafloor is being created, old seafloor on the subduction side of the plate is being subsumed into the mantle. And that, when those plates start subducting, that's where you get the tsunamis. Imagine plates locked together, and one of them is trying to go down and the other one's going over top of it. If there's a vertical slip, that's when you get a megathrust earthquake, and it completely jolts imagine shaking out a blanket. That's what it does to the ocean. And so all the big tsunamis originate in subduction zones.
Interesting. So when the earthquake is actually created from these plates, like something happens, like it slips or whatever, and it creates that. Can they anticipate that at all, or not really?
I mean, as I said, the science is pretty new, and this is hard. But Japan has been really working on this, and from what I've heard, they have a lot of sensors on the seafloor. Like, they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to figure this out. And the last big one they had in 2011, apparently there was a sensor that showed some sort of movement right before this happened. And the reason that's important is because if you're going to have 15 seconds, you could turn off electricity, you could get people out of elevators, you could, it would be helpful. But it's still, it's if there's an earthquake of more than 8.5 magnitude, it came from a subduction zone.
Right. And the tsunami, the way it works, the function of the wave is very different than what we see in terms of other waves. How does it function? Like when an earthquake, like, is it a wall? Like people have described it like it's a massive tide. Like, how would you describe it? Because its characteristics is different than, say, a
It's very big. They have a really long wavelength. So as a surfer, you'll know then, longer interval, longer wavelength means more power.
Mhm.
So tsunami is really powerful. And at this long wavelength actually makes it move really fast. So it moves at more than 500 miles an hour. It's just like if you think of a whip cracking, it's a very long whip. So I would characterize a tsunami as just a shriek, a massive, gigantic shriek of energy. And when you see the wave energy, I don't know how you describe it, but you can see it travels around the entire world. It's like a gong being rung. Um, and so that wave is fine when it's traveling at sea. It's traveling like through the oceans, galloping through the ocean. It's when it hits land that the tail starts backing up. And the best description of a tsunami that somebody told me was if it's 30 feet, it's going to be 30 feet for 5 minutes. It's like, so imagine the long wavelength is just coming, 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 and it's continually crashing up onto land.
Like, hold on, it's gonna be 30 feet for 30 minutes coming into land, or it's gonna be 30 minutes of nonstop waves.
Oh no, like imagine you got a 30-foot tsunami, it's not like a 30-foot cresting wave that you might surf.
Right.
It's gonna go onto land, and then the wave just keeps coming and coming and coming and coming for a while, right? Like because of its incredibly long wavelength.
Right. It's like the
So just
back of the wave is
power,
just so much
yeah,
water moving.
power, just power.
Yeah.
And so it's, the seawater is heavy, right? And when you jolt the entire water column in this vertical way, you've displaced this massive amount of water. So it's just a huge amount of energy that's contained in that wave with its really long wavelength.
Yeah, it's hard to explain sometimes. Like I know when I've been in big waves, but I was not surfing. I was on the shoulder, and I was like scared, but I could feel the ocean. Just like I can't imagine how a tsunami would be like. But I've been on big days where it's like it felt like slabs of weight just going behind me, and I'm like, whoa, like it huge. And I'm not even talking the days that you've seen. I can't imagine what it's like.
Everybody knows, I mean, anybody who spends any time in the ocean knows that waves are not to be trifled with. I mean, I remember getting completely destroyed by this little tiny wave in San Diego and ending up in the hospital. I don't know, it was maybe 3 feet tall. You hit it in the wrong place.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember writing in the wave that an 18-inch wave can topple a wall built to withstand 125 mile an hour winds. And I remember my editor saying, surely you mean 18 feet, right? It's like, nope, 18 inches. I mean, waves are powerful.
18-inch wave can topple a wall that's supposed to withstand 100-mile-an-hour winds. There it is.
25 mile an hour winds.
Be
Yeah.
specific. Well, now, what's the difference between, like, just if you don't mind, hear me, because of course my podcast is called Groundswell. How do you describe waves versus groundswell, and what is a groundswell in your words?
Well, groundswell is just it's like the energy goes in during a storm, and it basically is fueled by wind and pressure differences, and it starts to move. And as it moves, it just organizes itself, and it becomes like, if you look at a wave, like a sine wave pattern, it kind of organizes itself, at least in the beginning. So it's energy that reaches down further into the water column than, say, just a wind swell that would come along the surface and ruffle the surface of the water. This reaches further down into the water column, and it's fueled, and it's continually fueled as it moves through the ocean, becomes a little bit more of like an entity moving through the ocean.
Mm. And you and I talked about this one type of wave, soliton, which is a wave that continues on. Like
a soliton. Yeah, solitons are pretty fascinating waves. They're waves that don't change shape. So if you imagine a periscope moving through the water, that's kind of what they look like. And they are they're really fascinating to scientists. They have something to do with how rogue waves form, but it's complicated. They are I don't know how you describe them. Like, in a way, I think they're like they're a field of movement, but they don't change shape.
And the energy doesn't dissipate. Like they discovered it in some canal originally in England or
Yeah,
something, right?
yeah,
And then you
yeah.
mentioned something else, rogue waves.
Well, rogue waves are kind of defined as, so you sometimes on on a day with a big swell, you'll see a few waves coming in that are like the wave of the day, right? A little bigger, notably bigger than other waves around them. But rogue waves are more than double the size of the surrounding sea. So a rogue wave, if you got 20-foot seas and you've got a 55-foot wave, that would be considered a rogue or a freak, or an outlying wave that just doesn't really add up. And so scientists for the longest time were trying to figure out how this could happen. And I spent a lot of time hanging out with scientists that were trying to figure this out, and it all has to do with nonlinearity. So you get a lot of interactions when you have wave energy kind of going around like that in a storm. And through various mechanisms, sometimes the bathymetry of the seafloor will snag wave energy and it'll pile up like a car wreck, and all of a sudden you get a wave that's it can be 3-4 times bigger than the seas around it too. It's like the energy all kind of gets pirated into one unstable, much bigger wave. And so that was what interested me in the beginning. Was I was reading that, I think it was in the New York Times science section, that 2 large ships per week were going missing, just disappearing. And I was like, wait a minute, how can that possibly be? And it was it was in the mid 90s that I think that story came out, and they were still trying to figure this out. And people were thinking it couldn't be true. But there were mariners that would say, we saw these incredibly outsized waves that shouldn't have been there. And then it started becoming clearer and clearer and clearer, and there were some really undeniable instances of proof. And they realized, okay, now we're going to have to figure out how this happens, because actually it does happen.
Has it been recorded on video or anything?
I mean, I wouldn't say in any sort of. I mean, if you see a rogue wave,
You're going
one of
to
the big
be done
problems is
for.
it might be the last thing you'll ever see. But you do see mariners talk about it a lot. Yeah. Lots of even cruise ships have encountered them.
But people are like tall tales at sea. It's like how the biggest fish you've ever seen. Is there any truth to like some of these sea creatures that are mythical that you think they still could be out there?
I mean, we found the coelacanth. So the coelacanth, I forget when it was, 1930 or something, was thought to be extinct. It was like this fish with these giant scales. It looks pretty primitive. And now we know they're alive and well in the Indian Ocean. They found a shark called the megamouth with these giant car bumper lips that they didn't know about. So, I mean, I wouldn't say there are monsters there or mythical creatures living in the ocean, but there may be animals we haven't met yet, of size. I mean, there are countless animals we haven't met yet on smaller scales, but it would be hard for a very sizable creature. Although, you know what, I'm just contradicting myself, because it was only in 2015 that we first laid eyes on the giant squid.
Interesting.
It managed to hide, but we knew about it. We did know about it because pieces of them had washed up and they showed up in fishing nets and stuff, but nobody had seen them until 2015.
Did you see that documentary about the octopus pet?
Yeah.
That was interesting. What did you think of that?
I mean, I thought it was delightful and like really important, because the octopus is so unusual and so magnificent, but so unlike us. And there was a sort of this interspecies communion. It shows us, like, we tend to sort of put on anthropocentric goggles, and if it looks like us, if we can relate to it, we like it better. And all of a sudden, here was this interspecies communion with a creature that really very different than us, but not that different than us too. So I loved it. I mean, I thought it was really
I was
I mean, who
riveted.
didn't love that movie?
Oh my
Show me
gosh.
somebody who didn't love that
That was
movie.
such a it just totally made me think about how often we go about life, and he just had an acute attention and presence and patience, and we go through life, maybe we're going in the water, we're walking through the forest, and we just don't even take the time to kind of like just look for the patterns, try to be present, try to like interspecies communion, as you call it,
Yeah.
but you did that with
And
the
what are
dolphins
we
and
missing,
even yeah.
by kind of like counting these creatures that don't look like us out? I mean, I don't, I'm a big fan of E.O. Wilson's book Biophilia, which is basically its thesis is that we aren't separate from nature. We are part of nature. And when we forget that, we suffer. When we harm it, we harm ourselves. So that means everything. That means fungi, it means trees, it means bats, it means everything. I'm even to the point where I relate to microbes. I love microbes. They're so fascinating. They run this joint. They're under heralded. They're the unsung heroes of the planet. They're super fascinating. Um, I mean, it's just all miraculous.
I was just in Africa and I heard stories of plants that would communicate with each other to create more poison so that the elephants didn't eat too much of the tree leaves.
Yeah.
And I'm
I
like,
think that kind
wow.
of communication goes on all the time and it brings up questions of okay, what is intelligence? What is communication? I mean, we had this amazing experience on my first deep sea dive where we dived into the twilight zone, where, as I mentioned, 80% of the creatures are bioluminescent. And that's unusual for us because on land, we only have a few bioluminescent creatures like fireflies, some insects, some fungi, it's not common. But in the deep ocean, it's a really important for survival. They use it light as a signaling for communication, for mating, for hunting, for all kinds of different things. And so we went through this zone that had a lot of it, and it's people think the deep ocean is dark and scary, but they don't realize how beautiful it is, and there is this like very unusual light in there from the animals. So on the way back up, we went down to 3,300 feet, and we were in this unbelievable sort of limestone white, almost like White Sands National Park, Wonderland, and cruising around in the sub. And we came back up to like 700 meters, still completely pitch dark. And we were with two subs, and we were sitting in a plexiglass hull. So you're always sitting in a sphere when you go into the deep ocean because a sphere is the only shape that distributes the pressure completely symmetrically, so you don't have a weak spot. But when you're not going super deep, you can be in a plexiglass sphere, which is amazing because it's like you're part of. It's like you're in a bubble. You're floating in a bubble. Any deeper than 6,000 feet, you need titanium or steel. So here we are with this view, this unbelievable view of all this bioluminescence. And the pilot got both subs. We were diving in tandem to stop at 700 meters, and everything went dark. We turned out every light. We even put towels over the control panels. And he said, okay, close your eyes. I'm going to count to three. And on two, both subs flashed their brightest lights on and off really quickly. And on three, we opened our eyes and the entire water column just lit up as every creature flashed back at us simultaneously. And it was just mind blowing. The depth of them, like how many of them they were, the scale, the tiny to large. And I mean, I have this one picture. You can't really get it in a photo because it's an energetic moment. It's not form, it's energy. But you can't help but think in a moment like that there is some sort of a communion, that we made a signal and they signaled back. So that's a type of communication. And you just shriek in delight. And then we just went up another 100 meters and did it again and then did it again. Just, I mean, it is truly the most moving thing I've ever seen. And you just can't describe it.
To me, nature is the teacher.
Yep.
And, I know that I'm in the realm that most of my work is in business, and I've totally chosen to look at nature as the guide for responsible, ethical, healthy growth for businesses, non-artificial. And I feel like, human connection, intelligence, energy, all these things, ancient wisdom and nature itself is, the more we move in that direction, it feels the more sustainable, the more healthy. the more natural, the more real it is. And you've been such a great teacher for me. I mean, I could talk to you for 2 hours. Like the amount of things that you have to share, it's just astonishing.
Well, when we move away from nature, when we turn our backs on it, we're turning our backs on ourselves. We're separating ourselves out of our home. And nowhere is that more evident to me, and it sounds like to you, than in the ocean. And it is so much a part of the planet.
The ocean is just everything for me. It means so much, and I know it means to you. Thank you so much for giving me your time and sharing with us your stories. You're just an encyclopedia of amazing insights. I love your use of language. It's always so amazing. I'm so jealous. I wish I could write like you. What if you could want to send people to find you? Where would you like to send them?
Well, I'm pretty underpowered on social media, but I do answer messages on Instagram, and my handle is @SusanLCasey. I have a website that needs to be updated to include the Underworld, but it's SusanCasey.com. And those are the best places to find out what I'm up to. I will get the website updated soon.
Awesome. Thank you again for being on the show.
And my pleasure, Scott.
And for all you listening, once again, if you want to give any comments that I'll pass along or any suggestions, just go to groundswell.fm and just click on the voice and leave me a little voice message. And until next time, mahalo.